So welcome everyone to the next episode of the Catributors podcast. This week it's just Jedi and myself. There might have been a miscommunication again.
Yeah, we were hoping to have TC Freer, but there was a mix-up as to exactly which Friday, so we'll have him next week instead. But we have some numbers to discuss this week, so we immediately went, aha, TC Freer. He likes his spreadsheets.
True. Speaking of numbers, I think the first thing is basically the dev blog with the changes to the supership economy, because it looks like Wargaming wasn't very happy with the first iteration of it.
Yeah, so, I mean, this is something that was sort of mentioned a while back. I think this is the first real detail we've had about the kind of changes that they want to make. And they're not just doing a simple split of what's there already. They're taking the opportunity to make some deeper changes, as it turns out. Yeah, we don't. I mean, the numbers they've given don't necessarily all fully add up at the moment, but it gives some idea of the direction they want to go in, at least.
I mean, for the superships, the changes are even live already. They're basically just given the superships like.
Oh, the supership! Wow, my brain just went. Yeah,
you already went to the
other bit. No,
to
right,
the
superships. Yes, sorry, we're on the same page now. Literally, got ahead of myself there.
Basically, they just earn now less experience, and the credits from super battleships has been increased somewhat comparing to other classes. Not sure why. The most interesting part I found is that the amount of XP gained by super carriers for dealing damage was reduced. So basically what this tells me is Wargaming looks at the numbers and is like, well, super carriers do way too much damage. How do we solve this problem? Well, we give them less experience for it, so people won't realize that super carriers are overpowered. It's like the worst kind of cover-up, but maybe it works on some people.
Kind of, yeah. I suppose you could see it that way. That yeah, you look at the score screen at the end, and maybe they're not going to be as high up as they are before, but it doesn't necessarily de-incentivize playing them at all. So yeah, I don't really know what kind of change they think that will make in terms of like the influence of super carriers. That one's a bit peculiar.
The only reason I can really see is that they're trying once again to cover up how overperforming carriers are, because it's easier than to balance them, right? That's the only thing that makes sense. Now, they're rebalancing the credit income because, they wanted them to lose more credits or so, that I can see ship-wise, because super ships are designed to bleed credits. But that they especially deal with super carriers dealing too much damage by giving them less experience for it. It's just hilariously sad in my experience. But maybe they'll actually balance them at some point. I just don't hold much hope.
Yeah, we'll see. I think we're still fairly early days as far as super ships go.
Definitely.
In terms of them interacting with the economy. So I think we'll probably see more changes in the coming months.
Oh, certainly. I mean, which is also a nice lead to the actually big topic that you already mentioned before, the actual changes to the economy that are planned.
Yes, I got ahead of myself there. So, this is something they teased a while back, and it's something that's been requested for, I think, years at this point, to be able to separate the visuals of camo from the economic bonuses of camo, so that you're not tied to using certain camos to get certain bonuses. And like I said, there probably would have been a simpler way to do this that wouldn't really have impacted the current economy, but instead they have used this as an opportunity to get into the nuts and bolts of various economic mechanics. And we've seen them tinkering with the economy a bit previously, sort of around the periphery of it in terms of signals particularly, and not getting signals from like achievements in game anymore, having to buy more of them with coal or credits, and also obviously being able to mount a lot more signals as well. And so that was clearly a measure designed to move coal and credits out of the economy, because in a way it's something I've long praised the game for, the fact that it has actually quite a kind economy for a free-to-play game in terms of the player experience. But at the same time, you can see that the economy kind of got away from wargaming in terms of it being a free-to-play game and it being possible to make lots and lots of credits relatively quickly. I mean, another major example was what they did with the Missouri and the reintroduction of that, and the various tweaks they made to the permanent mission if you already happened to own it. So, rather than do what Say Gaijin has done repeatedly over the years, where they straight up nerf income gains or XP gains across the board, wargaming is they're continuing to be a bit more indirect about it. But this is probably the most direct changes we've seen so far in terms of what it looks like they're aiming to do. But this is all still initial details, and the actual the kind of example spreadsheet thing they provided so people could poke around at it themselves wasn't really functioning correctly, and I don't think it's as far as I know, it's still not functioning correctly. So it's hard to get an exact handle on it. But I think the consensus seems to be it's going to be a mix of positives and negatives as far as players are concerned. So shall we maybe go into the article a bit before we start talking about what Little White Mouse was going over?
Sure. I mean, basically, I think the important thing is first to say how the new system is working. Right? They separate the economic bonuses from the visuals completely, and you have a new economics tab where you can slot bonuses in separate slots. And for each, there is one slot for premium. Like if you had a premium camo, that goes into the premium slot, right? So there's basically still a premium economic bonus you can buy for a ship, and that just goes into that slot. And then you have one slot for credits, one for experience, one for, I think, captain experience, and one for free experience. And the experience modifier only affects ship experience in the future, and not all experience. And there are different, let's say, rarities for each slot, right? So you could have 100% bonus or a 300% bonus, or, depending on the slot, right? So you have, your common rarity buff or your rare rarity buff and so on. There's a list on how that's going to be transformed from the bonuses that you have right now. But
I mean, I highly suspect there will be loot boxes involved somehow in all of this process.
Yeah, I think the biggest information that we're missing is how in the future we are going to get those bonuses, because right now, the article says how the new system is supposed to work and how things are going to be transferred. And you can do some calculations on how would credit incomes now be if you stack all of your flags with afterwards when you just slot those bonuses. But the biggest question is, how are you going to get those, right? And I don't think they have really touched on that. So, and availability of those bonuses is obviously long-term the biggest question.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's sort of like what they did with the flag changes. I think they are trying to move to a system where they're making players pick and choose a lot more which ships they want to have their income bonuses on, as opposed to at the moment where you just have, a perma camo on a ship. You just get flat bonuses across the board for all of those ships. And I think what they want to do is kind of decrease the level of credits overall, but just going on what's here anyway, maybe give players the ability to have greater increases from individual ships by stacking the various bonuses, which would almost I mean, at the moment, you can just kind of play whatever, and even without a premium account, you can generally do all right across the board. But this almost feels like it might be moving towards how it is in like War Thunder, War of Tanks, where you kind of have to go out and play your premiums in order to fund your other ships. And that becomes the most effective thing, is to play your premiums with all the various bonuses on. The only real thing we have like that at the moment is the Missouri, where it's kind of head and shoulders above everything else. If you have the Missouri with the credit mission, so yeah, we'll need more detail to really understand like how these bonuses are credited to people. Like if it's going to be mission chains, or if it's going to be based on loot boxes, or if you're going to be able to, or even have to buy them in some cases. I mean, that screenshot there has like a 300% bonus, and it has a little 12 in the corner, 12 doubloons. So is that just going to be, if you want to auto replenish, it's going to cost you 12 doubloons every time, or do you
Probably.
you're going to have to stock up on them? And it kind of reminds me of World of Tanks' crew training books in that regard, because you get various levels of crew training books, and I think some of them you can like buy with credits and whatnot, and others that you just kind of earn through doing missions and such forth. So yeah, I do wonder how much inspiration they're taking from that, even though obviously it's more to do with credits than crew XP.
I mean, right now, like the basic economic flags, right? You can also do auto-replenish, and it will buy them for doubloons, which is annoyingly always on if you automatically.
A couple of the camos as well. There's like the Type 59 camo, and I think one or two others, which will auto-replenish for doubloons.
Didn't camos auto-replenish for credits?
Mostly, I think there's one or two that will replenish for doubloons, though. So that kind of mechanism is already in the game in some form.
Yeah, I presume like the lowest rarity economic bonus is probably something that you can auto-replenish, and then the higher ones you get special. Like I mean, right now there is a lot more mixing and matching, suppose, because there are a lot of special flags, different ones that all have different bonuses, and you can mix and match with what you have. And in a way, it's then simplified that you just have probably like 4 slots for each thing. And I presume the bigger bonuses you get from lovely bundles that they like to sell, or super crates or whatever.
I mean, in some way, you can see this as them trying to rationalize things and bring what currently are bonuses from camos and bonuses from signals into a single unitary system, which might make, from their perspective, it might make it easier to keep tabs on the kind of economic variables. But yeah, it doesn't really. We're still lacking a lot of fine detail in this article. This is still somewhat preliminary.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Have they given any timeline for this?
I don't think so. I mean, it might be we see it much later this year, but it's kind of such a big change that like it might even. Well, no, I suppose next year probably would be a bit. But then, on the other hand, we have all the stuff going on with the separation between Leicester and Wargaming, so maybe it might get pushed back as far as next year, depending on how much the impact is, because this is a fairly significant behind-the-scenes, economic change. My guess would be sometime this year.
Yeah, I think it might have originally been, I think it was in the roadmap that they posted, so it might have been something planned for summer, so I forgot. But obviously, with a big change this big, who knows? And all of those numbers might also still change, right? This is a very preliminary article, I suppose.
Indeed, I definitely wouldn't take anything that's in here as being written in stone.
Yeah, they also some basic, like they changed the basic free experience is going to be doubled, and something like about the service cost of some ships adjusted and so on. So they make some base changes on top of this system as well. So I think overall, from what has been calculated so far by people that have looked into this a bit more, is it seems overall relatively equal to what we have now. But
yeah,
of course,
it's taking some things away, but it's also giving some benefits to players. So there's no we can't really look at it and say it's more sort of positives than negatives at the moment, or negatives than positives. Which I think that's probably their goal, is to have something that is that at least feels fair to players. Although there might be individual elements that end up being controversial.
I mean, my theory is from all of this article and for what we've seen so far is that they're trying to make it somewhat fair in that it's possible to earn about the same thing as it is right now, and that the conversion of what we have to the new system will be relatively fair, but then they might make it just hard to earn the good bonuses in the future, right? So basically make a system that potentially could achieve what the current system does, and don't take any of the current resources away from you, but in the future be a lot more stingy with giving you the good buffs. That's something that I could see happening, of course.
Yeah, I mean, this is it absolutely has the potential to be a system whereby it starts off with something very, very close to the current system, but over time, like they could tweak the odds of the various bonuses appearing for players, and nerf or even potentially stealth nerf the economy by doing stuff like that.
And I mean, it might give them something, let's say, more attractive to put in loot boxes than the flags that are currently not that great. If they actually make like when you look at this, what not sure what this bonus is. Was it a free experience bonus or something like that? It starts out at 300, then goes to 600, then to 2,400, and to 7,200%, the highest bonus, right? And if you make that like really rare, and you put some of those tokens into loot boxes, then you have like the crap loot that usually nobody wants, and you kind of can make things like that more interesting by offering those as prizes. So, I mean, who knows? But it's something that I could see definitely Wargaming trying to do.
Certainly, yeah. That is potentially going to be a more attractive reward for people, rather than I'm going to get some random flags that I may not have any use for. And if it is going to go in loot boxes, you'll at least be able to then see the odds of actually getting, the good stuff.
And
as opposed to, you might get some flags, but we won't tell you what kind of flags.
Also, when it comes to premium camos, from what I've seen, is that like the camo will only be visual, right? And that means they're going to split the price of a camo and partially sell you the economic bonus and partially like the visuals, right? So I don't know, a camo that was now worth 5,000 doubloons, maybe you'd pay 2,000 for, I don't know, the visuals, and then 3,000 for the economic bonus, and you can buy them separately, right? So you can only buy the visual part of a camo, you can only buy the economic part of a camo. From the way I understand it. Which also gives them a much more opportunity to monetize pure visuals, because they are now gonna sell visuals cheaper, I suppose, because you only want the economic bonus once.
Yeah,
right?
I would hope that would mean things like the kind of perma camos and stuff like the like even like the Golden Week sort of samurai ship skins that are being sold at the moment, which are, I think, more expensive than standard perma camos. Stuff like that, hopefully the price would drop. I think one big question mark is, and I can't remember, because I did read over this, but I can't remember if it addresses it specifically, but what it's going to mean for premium ships. I don't know if it does specifically. address that? Like how things will
I mean,
change? It's got a note about Missouri right down at the bottom, but it doesn't.
I suppose premium ships will just have maybe a different modifier on the permanent on the premium economic boost, and they will just come automatically with it, right?
Yeah, I mean that would kind of make the most sense to do it that way, I suppose.
And yet I have an actual example for permanent camos. Like, for example, for the Yamato, economic boost will cost you 4,800 doubloons. And if you buy, for example, Scorpiot would then cost you 3,200 doubloons, right? So if you want only the visuals, then you would buy that. And the Type 20, like the regular premium camo visuals, would be 200 doubloons. So if you only want like the permanent visuals of the camo, it's only 200 doubloons, and the economic is 4,800, right? And Scorpioid, which was a more expensive camo because it really transforms the ship, costs 3,200. And right now that costs, I think, 8,000, right? So that is split in the 4,800 for the economic and 3,200 for the visuals. And that's actually a pretty cheap reduction when you think about it, because there are ships like, for example, the Yamato has, I don't know how it's called, it has the one with the very long range finder, very beautiful camo. It has the Scorpioid camo. I don't know how did it have
camo?
Yeah, probably. So
not AL. Yeah, no, it does. Oh no, wait, it's like Musashi. I think it's High School Fleet. That's the one I'm thinking of. I know it's got one of the.
And I mean, if you want multiple of those camos for a ship, right? That's a severe reduction.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the things that we've certainly talked about a lot in the past. Is wargaming kind of ignoring or semi-ignoring people's desire for customizations, and this is, I think, going to be. I hope it's at least. I hope I'm vindicated in saying that it's going to be. It's going to make these just the purely visual look of permacamos much more popular. Because at the moment they are potentially quite an investment.
I mean, I also hope that for the good regular looking camos that they'll make them more available, because wargaming is obviously always concerned about the economy. So if you have a good looking camo, but it also comes with good bonuses. I don't know, for example, like Fu, you mentioned the Pi Day camo. Pi Day camo is a really good looking one. I don't know what exactly bonuses are on. But when wargaming like gives out camos like this right now, they are always concerned about the economic impact. But if that's removed, then they have no reason to limit the supply of a lot of good looking camos, right? I mean, obviously they want to profit from that, so they'll probably sell things in some way. But it gives them a lot more option to offer cool looking camos that are in a very short supply right now. I'm at least hoping they will offer some, because there are so many good looking camos that I've barely ever used, because I'm like, yeah, I have 10 of those. They would look great, but I only have 10 of those, so I'm never mounting them.
Mm-hmm. I get to look. Yeah, there's a couple where it's just like single digits, and I get to look at them in port once in a blue moon, but I'm never actually going to use them in a game.
Yeah, it's so sad. You look at it in port like, that's a good looking ship. Now let's mount something ugly and go to battle. So yeah, for those interested, like in this article, there's a conversion calculator that I don't think it has fixed yet. So like I think Little Mouse has found some errors in this, and I don't think wargaming has fixed it yet, although I'm not sure. So take any conversion things here with a grain of salt. I mean, take any numbers in this article with a grain of salt anyway, because they are all still in testing or being planned.
Yeah, some of these things might change, but I mean, there's certainly going to be some good benefits for players overall. I mean, especially if you're a free player, the base level of free XP gain is going to double from 5 to 10%. So that's going to be quite nice. And ships are just going to, like as a freebie, get baked in the baked in, was it like 3% concealment you get from mounting a camo? Although the flip side for that is that everyone's going to lose the 2% dispersion penalty that other ships have for firing on you when you're mounting a camo. So that is probably, like, we'll see what change that makes, because 2% doesn't sound like a lot, but with the way the wargaming formulas work, sometimes the small percentages can make a bigger difference than you can realize.
True.
So we'll see how that works out. I mean, that then might end up being dropped as an idea, or potentially you could have, like, some classes, for instance, are going to miss that dispersion bonus more than others. Destroyers and cruisers, particularly, I think the squashier ships, or the ships without a large amount of hit points.
So, to answer your question, Sean, all existing camos lose the economic bonus. There will no longer be any sort of connection between any visual or any economic bonus. This is all gone. No camo will ever have any bonus anymore. It's all just visuals after this change. They all get separated, and you get rewarded with the new tokens, right? If you have currently a camo that has a certain economic bonus, then you'll get a token that you can slot basically for all of the consumable ones, right? And for the permanent camos, you basically get a permanent increase on the ship in.
Yeah, one change they are making, and again, I think this is just simplification, is they're removing the service cost reduction and replacing them across the board with just credit income bonuses. So I think that's one of those things that is just trying to make things simpler on their end. Like, that's not necessarily going to have an effect on players' total earnings.
Yeah, I suppose. And it's also going to be interesting because with like the remove of stats from camos, how much the 4% dispersion, that's something that you can't get back, right? While the concealment the base concealment of all ships is going to be changed to include the lack of concealment from camos. So concealment should be the same on all ships, but the 4% dispersion, that's not being compensated for.
That's going to be probably the overall most, well, to me anyway, that seems like it's going to be the most kind of generally controversial thing, because that's kind of it's a nerf for everybody's survivability, and it's a buff for everybody's accuracy, even if it doesn't necessarily seem like a huge one. And I don't think I've seen a rationale for that. It says it several times through the article, but I don't think they've really said why they want to make that change.
Honestly, I would assume that they're just they would have to change the accuracy on all ships if they, or I don't know how. Like, maybe it's just that they are too lazy to find a way to implement it. I think like that, and they don't feel like it's going to make that big of a difference. But I mean, at least unlike Data, it's going to be across the board, so it doesn't necessarily incentivize people to camp at the back. But yes, it makes all ships in the game slightly more accurate, basically. To a degree that we will, how much impact this has is hard to say without testing it.
I mean, because on the face of it, it's a slight buff to everyone's accuracy, but it's also a slight nerf to everyone's survivability. But we don't really know until, I guess, it's implemented how slight or how slight that buff and nerf will be, respectively.
I mean, honestly, it's not a bad idea that this isn't on the camo, because you see sometimes maybe inexperienced players just go naked into a battle, right? And if you miss an economic boost, that's not really an issue, right? But if you miss like the few percent concealment and the accuracy thing, basically they're removing the chance that you're missing out on that bonus. So in that regard, I guess it's good.
And that's certainly, I think, of most benefit to free-to-play players, people that maybe don't play very often, or lower tier players where you're still in that stage where every credit counts, because that can put you at a real disadvantage. Like destroys versus destroys, for example, that 100 meters, 200 meters, whatever the extra camo bonus at the moment can absolutely be the deciding factor in an engagement of who gets spotted first, who gets shot at first, who's able to spot for allies without getting spotted by, in theory, equally stealthy opponent, but they don't have the camo, and that's what makes the difference.
Honestly, when I look at the whole system, it feels like it's going to be more new player friendly, while a lot of veterans will probably look at it and ask why. Because it's not necessarily improving it for players, it's just gonna make them learn a new system and potentially confusing them. But if you're a new player coming into the game, like if you just see a tab, here you slot your credit bonus and it exists in common, uncommon, rare, very rare, like a usual rarity system that you know from games, and here you can mount the other economic bonus for experience and so on. Like, it looks like for a new player who's never played this game, it's more intuitive than the current system. While for a veteran, they might look at this and like, why do we have to go through all of this change that doesn't actually do much for us?
Yeah, we'll see how, I don't know, how smooth the transition is, I guess, and how off-putting it's made, because sometimes these changes are significant enough that, it can affect players' desire to keep playing. I mean, the big example from Modern Tanks was when they changed from premium ammo, gold ammo as it's still sometimes called, going from being only purchasable with in-game gold, the premium currency, to something that could be purchased with both that and credits. And they didn't really make any changes to the ammo itself. They just changed how it could be bought, and suddenly it became available to a lot more people, and that did have a big impact on the game. And I personally knew some very good players at that point that just kind of quit the game in disgust, because they were really hoping that it would either be removed entirely or else they would actually make further changes rather than just the change to how it's bought. And instead, over the years, it's gone to the point where, well, it's not even, I don't think you can even spend gold on it anymore. But they still haven't really changed the nature or the function of it that much. It's still just better ammunition that costs more, essentially.
And I mean, the removing the chance to buy it from gold doesn't do anything, because you can buy credits with gold. So you can still buy a gold transfer to credits.
You still absolutely can indirectly, sink real money into it, and then
they've just obscured that you're spending real money on it a little bit more.
Yeah. That's one thing I'll definitely give War Thunder their tanks, is that the system of different shell types might initially be more confusing, but I think there's plenty of resources out there to explain what shells do what, and they actually have different functions in different scenarios, and different nations' ammo choices does have quite a big effect on how you have to play those. Whereas you compare that to little tanks, and it's just, I'll just press the 2 key and I get better ammo. But again, it does favor people that have paid money indirectly through premium accounts, because they can that much better afford to do that. So I was very glad when World Warships came out and they were like, we're not doing premium ammo.
True. Very true. No, Tom, no premium ammo in World of Warships.
No, they haven't gone that mad.
Yet. give them a year or two.
There'd probably be a revolt, like a riot, if they tried to do that.
2 players still playing then in the Submarines.
Either that, or they'll give subs special gold torpedoes they have to pay doubloons for.
You can send a gold-plated torpedo for 100 doubloons. Does more damage and has auto-tracking.
Yeah, does max citadel damage every time.
So yeah, overall, like the economy, as I said, right, if people are more interested, there is a lot more in this article. There is a calculator that may or may not work correctly. And overall, it looks like they are going to be at least initial relatively fair with the conversation, and then maybe they will just make their money in distributing the bonuses differently. But it's way too early to tell how it all will turn out and if it even can. But the positive news is definitely if you are a camo collector like me, that you'll probably get the visuals cheaper because they're separated from the economic bonus.
Yeah, definitely. And hopefully anyone that's got a... we don't know how generous they're going to be, but anyone that's got a good stock of camos and signals will end up with a very good stock of these bonuses out of it. But like I said, I think their intent is to get people to be having specific ships that they put all their good bonuses on, and then earn less, generally speaking, across the rest of their ships, which indirectly will. I don't know if this is their intent or not, but it indirectly will potentially make premium ships more attractive as well. Potentially. But given that we don't quite know exactly what they're doing with premium ships, because they only really address perma-camos, so yeah, we'll see.
Well, I mean, premium ships have perma-camos on them.
They do, but they have kind of better baked-in bonuses than the standard tech tree perma-camos for each tier, generally speaking.
Yeah, but I suppose they just have a better than passive premium bonus on them.
Potentially, yeah. As long as it's... I think that's one thing they probably will be quite careful about, is making the earnings of premium ships be comparable, because if you start monkeying around with stuff that people have paid money for, and potentially, people might have quite a lot of premium ships at this stage in the game, that's the stage where you might end up opening yourself up to lawsuits and such like. So I think they might be extra careful about that.
Well, we will see, I suppose.
Yeah, lots of speculation on our part, but
I mean, also if this is a plan that's a few months out, right, by then there might be an entirely different development team that takes a look at this and is like, what? Why? So,
true.
It makes it even more uncertain than it would normally be, I suppose.
Yeah, there's all still that fog of uncertainty going on with the studio split to take into account as well, as we were saying towards the start. So we'll see. But it's interesting to we at least have to give them credit for trying to give us some numbers to actually understand this and not just be completely vague about it.
True. It's a very... I mean, I think it's in some ways possibly needlessly complicated, but it's a very thorough article with they go in conversations with offering tools where you can see how the stuff that you have right now will be converted into the new bonuses and such. But as I said, there was a bug with that. I'm not sure if that calculator has been fixed. So. But hey, they tried.
An attempt was made.
But I suppose we can move on from that to other dev blocks, or do you still have something for the economy?
I think that's it, really. I mean, I'm still most interested to see what they do with premium ships exactly. But yeah, I think overall, I probably would have preferred it if they had done a simpler split. And even just done it with camos and left signals alone kind of thing. But they've obviously decided to do something a bit more complicated. So we'll see how it works out. This is one of those things where, in part, we just kind of have to wait and see.
True.
But there's no obvious, huge, massive, honking, great big red flags so far. So,
true.
I'm vaguely cautiously optimistic, but we'll see. Optimism is probably a dangerous thing in the context of online free-to-play games.
Possibly. We've been burned by Warships in the past, but we are once again trying to be very cautiously optimistic that it's not a complete failure.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, there are some changes to test ships, which I'm not sure if anything truly interesting is there other than they have started nerfing San Diego again.
Yeah, they've knocked the sap on the head a bit, which is, I don't know if that was maybe to be expected.
I mean, that's a fairly major change, though. Especially they also changed the reload. So I'm not sure how it stands DPM-wise now, but it's like San Diego started out being reload booster focused, but with the reload booster, it was worse than an Atlanta. So basically, a tier 8 ship with less DPM with its gimmick than an Atlanta, right? So after a lot of backlash from the community, they actually buffed the ship, and now they're back to nerfing it again. I'm not sure how much it has been nerfed by that. But this is a fifth of the damage has been taken off per shot, and the reload nerf.
I do wonder how much they have given themselves this issue with making it an SAP ship, because you've got to with the SAP being particularly effective against destroyers and other lightly armored targets. Like you've got that as almost a separate balancing issue from the SAP versus everything else. And so you might end up balancing it just fine against the destroyers and lightly armored targets, but then make it super weak against everything else in terms of just not having enough damage output. But then if you do too far the other way, then it becomes super OP versus destroyers and whatnot. So I kind of feel like they've given themselves this issue by making it an SAP cruiser when it didn't necessarily have to be.
I also feel like they're giving themselves this issue with the reload booster. Like originally it was supposed to be like the Austin, right? Entirely focused around its reload booster, and then they've changed that, and now it only has 2 charges of it. But still, if you have 2 charges, right? It's like you can, if you have some very strong ammunition and generally not the worst reload, and if reload booster for a short amount of time, you have this very short moment of burst, and that's exactly how long destroyers are spotted, right? So if you pair that ship like with a radar, and then you raid a destroyer, and you only see that destroyer for like 10 seconds and can shoot it, but if you can burst a lot of damage thanks to reload booster in the 10 seconds, then it's certainly inflates the damage that you do, or like the effectiveness of the ship, but only in those right circumstances, which also will be less once people figure out how powerful the San Diego is, right? If you're a destroyer player, you know which ships you need to be more careful around.
The more, this is a problem that, I mean, it's certainly not going to be unique to this, but there's certainly ships in game at the moment as well, where the more specialized they are, kind of like the less generally useful they are. So you might have circumstances where they can absolutely kick out a bunch of damage in short order, or some specific circumstance where the combination of consumables they have is exceptionally useful, but then the rest of the time is, functionally kind of dead weight, doesn't do anything. And I think those kind of ships are always going to be a tough sell to a general audience, because if the promise of the ship is, well, like 5% of the time you get to be really super, super effective, and the other 95% of the time you are absolutely kind of subpar, not really contributing that much to your team, most people are going to look at that and say, pass. There will be always some niche of players that really like that one thing and will be happy to accept the 95% downtime, as it were. But I think this almost goes back to something we've said previously, was the fact that they picked a really, like, within NA anyway, something that is a comparatively well-known ship. This was a bad ship to try and stick a really niche gimmick on. It'd be like taking Warspite and sticking a super, super niche gimmick on it.
Yeah, And it's also the problem with these niche gimmicks is that they're a lot harder to test because a lot of it becomes understanding the gimmick and playing around it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, while not everybody in the player base is actually going to play around things like that, but the more known something is, right? For example, if you don't know that a battleship has torpedoes, right? Once it's widely known that the battleship has torpedoes, people will play differently when they counter this ship. So and if a battleship has torpedoes, it's just a small gimmick oftentimes. But for something like the San Diego, if you only have 2 reload booster and it's balanced around getting the most out of these 2 things, it's first of all hard to play. It's often frustrating if you fail to use reload boosters properly, and it's going to be a lot less effective once people know that they just need to play around those 2 charges.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think if they'd made it something else other than the San Diego, I think the reaction might have been a bit more muted. But they've kind of hit themselves with a double whammy really there. So we'll see. Yeah, we'll see what effect that has overall. But yeah, it should be noted. I mean, in that where is it? I think there's a later one where they said they actually have nerfed it again. So it was 5 to 5.25, and then in the changes to test ships 11.3, it's then going to 5.5. So yeah. Actually, no, that's even in the same article. That's weird. I just noticed that. Why is that twice in the same article? It says it's going from 5 to 5.25, and then further down the same article, it says it's going from 5.25 to 5.5. I'm confused now. I thought that was a separate. I was scrolling down and thought, oh, that must be a separate article. If it's it's just above where it says the Aquila. Why is it listed twice? Which one is it?
No, the first changes were applied to the live server before the end of the week, and the others are with the next update.
Okay. Wow, okay, that's me not reading the headers properly. It's in
so basically, they felt San Diego was so overperforming that they immediately nerfed it in between patches, and then they decided to nerf it further.
And there's going to be an even further nerf. Right, okay, that's unconfused my poor brain there.
But it's interesting because from what I've seen, the San Diego doesn't look that dangerous. But, I mean, we'll see. I'm concerned that Wargaming is basing this around some people very effectively using a gimmick because nobody knows it's there. But we'll see.
Yeah. I mean, there's the danger that they released it in an over-nerfed state, nobody plays it, and it just remains in that state forever and ever because, people were being overly effective in finding those scenarios where it does work very well compared to what the general player base would be able to manage. And once a ship kind of gets the reputation, it's hard to recover from that initial reputation. So it might end up being rebalanced, further down the line to something that works well for, or at least reasonably well for everybody. But at that point, the damage might already be done, kind of thing.
I mean, it's weird because Wargaming releases ships in a very wide range from very underperforming to very overperforming. So whenever they make changes like this, I feel like, I mean, it's fair to say I've lost a lot of trust into Wargaming because from the things that they release, we see that they are often wildly unbalanced in both directions, and they are very reluctant to change it afterwards. So them nerfing San Diego heavily again, I don't necessarily think that the ship's as strong as Wargaming believe. I have never played it, obviously. I only have seen stats. But knowing Wargaming and the way they usually behave, I wouldn't be surprised if San Diego comes out in a very weak state and then stays there for years.
Yeah. It would not be without precedent, shall we say? So yeah, we'll see, but it's certainly reading stuff like this is certainly going to make a lot of fans of the real life San Diego unhappy for sure.
Well, and then, I mean, there are a lot of other ships that... It's always hard to, like, if you have never played them, to see how they impact. And for most ships, I don't even know their test ship stats that well. San Diego just has been a topic that we have discussed in the past, because San Diego was memorable because they tried to release it in a state that's worse than an Atlanta at tier 8. So.
Yeah.
So it's interesting when you see a ship for wargaming, like the initial proposal was so bad that it's face palming worthy, and then they buffed it a little, and then they nerfed it immediately afterwards. So let's just say San Diego is something that's a little bit has more eyes on it.
Yeah, I think that's probably a fair way of like, it's certainly a quite a high profile example of, and you don't often get like we have had in the past. Ships where just the core concept seems fairly fatally flawed, and I can't remember what last one we had, like the original Pobeda, maybe / Slava, or whatever it was that the test version was, which was a bit like insane long range accuracy, which we still kind of ended up with in the game, but I think it was toned down from what they originally had in mind. But yeah, there's been just a couple of examples over the years, and this is I think certainly one of them where you just look at what the core idea of the ship is and think, no, that's not going to work. Lo and behold, they have had much difficulty in actually, balancing it, unsurprisingly.
I mean, you know what? It reminded me a bit of what was it? The set. It's set 39 or so, like the tier 7 premium German destroyer that originally was planned at tier 8, and people took a look at it, and it was worse in every stat than the existing tech tree ship, right? And it's just like the tech tree ship wasn't that great, and this was worse in every way. Rogan was like, we don't, no, this is a fine ship. No, this is perfectly fine. And then they basically took the ship, including the tier 8 module slot, and just moved it to tier 7. There might have been some slight changes there, but they more or less took the concept that they wanted to put at tier 8, put it at tier 7, and it wasn't overpowered. But left it there. And this is sometimes baffling, because they have proposals that you look on paper and you see it like, this makes no sense. And Rogan was like, what? Why? I mean, we don't see why this wouldn't. Oh, wait, this is actually right. We took a tier 7 ship at tier 8. Yeah, maybe you have a point there. Let's just call it tier 7.
They do occasionally make decisions. I'm sure we can probably think of multiple examples between us where certainly when we were still CCs, there was the kind of collective response of, this is not going to work. And they go ahead and try it anyway and go, oh yeah, it didn't work. But occasionally, even when there was the mass, that's not going to work, they went ahead and persisted, and we had to wait quite a long time for well, actually that didn't work. And sometimes we never heard well, that didn't work, and we have questionable things in game, like I don't know, Italian battleships maybe. Still not a popular line for some reason.
I mean, I'm more lenient with concepts that just haven't really been tested yet. Even if it's a concept that you look at it at paper and you're like, this is never going to work, and we still want to test it, then I'm like, okay, maybe like just most people are wrong and they are onto something, and it surprisingly works out, even though it doesn't make sense. So I can at least somewhat take a look at this. Yeah, okay, test it, right? Because you can always. But if you have a concept that's on paper, if you just take a ship and make it worse in every regard and be like, hey, this is this new ship, then it's like, what's the point? Like, this doesn't even there is nothing to test, right? If you make a ship worse in every stat, then it's a worse ship. It's like, maybe it's secretly not.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the things that, like, where you can't even argue, well, we should test this, right? It's like, no. But anyway.
So, yeah, I think the saga of the San Diego might go on for a little while yet, I guess. We'll see.
Then we also have... Oh,
I was going to say, the only other interesting thing on there is maybe the changes to the Aquila, which is getting smaller squadrons, fewer planes overall. But they're also making the torp bombers more effective, it looks like. So I do wonder if that's going to be the focus of the Aquila is torpedoes. We've had a lot of focus on different types of, drop bombs, AP bombs, skip bombs. So this might be a more torpedo-focused one.
I have met, I think, one Aquila in games so far, and it hasn't really come for me. So I have absolutely no idea about how the Aquila will perform.
I guess we'll see. I mean, that's probably going to be testing for another couple of patches, another patch or two.
Yeah, then we have also some changes to like non-test ships, and Buffalo is also getting nerfed, Tom, right? So that's the first thing. They nerf basically the US Raider. But the good thing is they actually made their surveillance Raider now the default consumable in the slot. And that's something that should have been done a few years ago. But, better late than never, I suppose.
Yeah, we won't see. Like, you would hope somebody that's gotten to tier 10 wouldn't be, I took the spotter plane on purpose, but there might be somebody somewhere that just didn't ever click that thing on the consumable screen and wondered why they didn't have radar, but everyone else did.
It's the fighter plane that's the default consumable.
Oh no, well, yeah, I knew it was some kind of catapult something.
Yeah. If they use spotter plane, they actually selected it. If you see a fighter plane Lemoyne, it might be that it wasn't aware that it can change it, or it's the first game and it's forgotten to change it. But because I've a few weeks ago or so, I've seen a fighter plane Lemoyne, and then we started a discussion why would you ever use a fighter plane, right? And then I checked, and it's like the default consumable if you buy the ship. But my personal theory about this radar change is that they want to make the Annapolis different, because I presume the Annapolis has 40 seconds. I haven't checked actually, but I would have presumed it has the same radar as Des Moines. But they want like the radar to get longer in the higher tiers, and they didn't want to give the Annapolis an even longer radar, so they're just nerfing the ones below that to make Annapolis stand out more. That's what I assume.
Yeah, I mean, it might be that. I think maybe there's also a little bit of, like, there is so much radar at high tiers these days, and especially if you're using the correct modules, you can get that 40 seconds up to, I can't even remember, you can get up to like nearly 50 seconds, I think.
Yeah, probably.
It's quite a hostile environment for destroyers. Like, if you see a Soviet radar, at least you know it's going to be over relatively quickly. But if you see a Des Moines or a Buffalo or a Worcester or something like that, you know that area is going to be denied for quite a long time. And if somebody pops up at relatively close range and you're not that you're too far away from their max radar range to get unspotted easily, then that can really, really screw you. So it's like 5 seconds, I think is reasonably significant. So yeah, it might be they're trying to make life for destroyers a little bit easier.
Possible. I mean, I won't object to it. I think like 35 is still a respectable choice, especially if you buff it with the module and so on. And most destroyers aren't in there for the entire duration anyway.
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, the radar pops off, and it's a US radar. You run away as hard and fast as you possibly can, because there's no, like, if you're just trying to sort of jink and dodge like you might try with a Soviet radar that is only going to be like 10, 12, 15 seconds. It's a significantly longer duration to try and stay alive and undamaged whilst being actively spotted. So yeah, I don't think it's necessarily a huge buff for destroyer survivability, but it's something.
Yeah, then moving on, we have a sigma reduction for the Harbin, which I think this change is just there to confuse people, because the practical impact of this will not be visible, really. And it's not like Harbin is really overperforming, so it's not like I think Harbin needs a nerf, and I don't think this will actually do anything. So I have no idea why this is here. It could just be that somebody made a rounding issue and it was never supposed to be 2.05 and decided to drop it to 2 or whatever. I'm absolutely baffled by this because it makes no difference and no sense.
Yeah, it's one of those parameter changes where it's really not going to affect players, but it might make a tiny effect on like the averages on a spreadsheet kind of thing. So I don't know. Maybe they thought the averages on the spreadsheet were just that tiny little bit too high, so they've made this small tweak to Sigma. Which, if this had been a battleship, it might have been a more significant change. But when you're in a relatively fast-firing light cruiser,
with little range, so it's not even going to be on long range.
That Sigma change is kind of largely not quite irrelevant, but from a player's point of view, I suppose it's sort of irrelevant.
Yeah, I mean it's 0.5 on a light cruiser with little range. I highly doubt that you will even see this on a scoreboard or in a statistic. Largely, that's why it's so baffling. It's such a small change that you don't expect an actual gameplay impact.
2 is still really good as well. So
yeah. Well, then they are also nerfing the super. Well, they are very, very slightly nerfing the super carriers. There was something that I saw on Reddit there. Something about the damage. There it is. United States 527,797 damage. The European record. So this ship has been out for not even a month. And the damage record now stands by 530,000 points of damage, which is pretty. It's a lot of damage, for the little amount of time this ship has been around. So obviously, wargaming is giving you 10 more seconds reload on one squadron and 20 more seconds on another one. And keep in mind, you still have your regular planes. Like in a lot of cases, like it's not like you're necessarily launching all of those squadrons on cooldown in the first place, because you have your other planes in between. You're not going to halfway to a target call your planes back in order to launch a different squadron. So this will have very little impact. So what would have much more sense is reduce the damage the actual squadrons do. But
you can't do that. You might hurt the poor CV players' feelings.
Definitely. So it's the ships that are really overperforming, they are getting a slight slap on the wrist. Naughty you. Do it a bit slower.
Yeah, I think that's another change that people aren't honestly gonna notice.
Yeah, you
won't.
It
was every squadron that was getting a longer or not even a longer cooldown, but if they coupled that with like a longer plane replenishment or something like that, I don't know.
I mean, anyway, it just shows that they are either utterly incompetent or they have no intention of actually balancing those ships. Possibly a mixture of both. But there is good news. There is actual good news, and this is that they are nerfing the armor of Petro. So they have meter raising the Petro apparently didn't do the trick. Who knew? So now they are actually working on the armor. So this is a good thing, because the problem with the Petro was always that it's too tanky, and they are finally trying to address that. So it took them a long time, but good change. Actually, good change.
50 to 40. That's going to, especially the deck armor. I mean, that's going to mean. I don't have the numbers to hand, but there's going to be certain cruisers that can now do deck HE pens, I think. I'm trying to think with the Hindi, would that need IFHE to achieve that? I'm not sure. But I mean, I think for battleship caliber HE, it's probably not going to make any real difference. But there are some cruisers that perhaps then might be able to more effectively deal with annoying bow tanking Petros. I guess we'll see. Somebody somewhere will be feverishly checking the numbers of various ships, I'm sure.
Possibly, but definitely like they're going in the right direction with the Petro finally. So credit where credit's due. That's good.
Yeah, I mean they're doing it a bit at a time, but they are doing it, which is better than not doing it. Just ignoring the problem entirely and saying, "Yeah, it's fine. Don't worry about it."
So Henry gets slightly better rudder shift, which is probably also welcome.
Yeah, nothing significant, but that's what 0.7 seconds, better part of a second. So again, kind of a smallish change, but in the right direction. There's also a slight nerf to Ragnar. That's been a bit of a sleeper hit, that one. I think there are a lot of people that. I've just realised my webcam's kind of freezing, and I don't know why. I guess Ragnar's steel ship, right? It's one of those ones where I think a lot of people didn't kind of realize how effective it could be, and then there's been some quite popular streamers and YouTubers have gone, oh, actually, yeah, this is pretty good, and it's maybe kind of gained a bit more recognition. Maybe there's been more people playing it, and Wargaming have realized, oh yeah, that can be quite effective. So it's not a particularly big nerf, but it is a nerf.
Yeah.
3.4 seconds is still a really quick reload.
Definitely. I haven't played the Ragnar myself. I've run into them and they can be quite scary. So I have no problem with that nerf so far. And I also haven't felt like Ragnar is that overperforming that they'd have to hit it with a big nerf hammer. But as I said, I haven't played it myself.
I guess we'll have to keep an eye out and see if there's any subsequent Ragnar nerfs like we've had with the Petro. So we have a kind of a sideways buff for a line that's really been left in the dirt, might be putting it a bit strongly, but one that has certainly been, I think, really power crept since it came out. Has always had some issues. The Pan-Asian destroyers. And instead of going like, the Yueyang is not performing very well, or the Shenyang, or they've instead decided to give them a torpedo reload booster consumable, which is going to be situationally, occasionally useful, but it doesn't really address any of the root weaknesses that those ships can be said to have.
And true, it's weird the way they try. I mean, I suppose because they are like deep waters is sort of the thing of Pan-Asians, right? And I think they just really wanted to be the identity. That's why they are buffing the torpedoes so much. It would have made a lot more sense to give the ships, I think, more gunpowder, because they used to be a lot more scary back in the day. They were just outshined so much by others. And originally, like, one of the biggest advantages was that they could mount radar instead of smoke. But there are so many radar destroyers out there these days that they just can't compete in that niche anymore. So instead of giving them some relevance in that area, I think Wargaming is just decided, okay, you're just going to be deep water top specialists in that sense. And they're trying hard to push that. Generally, buffs to those ships is welcome because almost nobody plays them anyway.
And the thing with destroyers that particularly rely on torpedoes, and in this case, can't even torpedo other destroyers, so it rather limits their effective targets. It means that it's going to be a buff in some circumstances, but not really where it counts, because like if you're basically really struggling with your gun power, and you are heavily reliant on torpedoes, and especially if you always know well, not always, but if you're more often than not going to be at a disadvantage with your guns versus other destroyers, because you absolutely can't rely on torpedoes to even make them dodge, then it's definitely a limited buff in my eyes. It's only going to help in fairly limited circumstances where you would already be doing well with your torpedoes, because it's the case as anyone that's played a torpedo dependent line is that it can be very feast or famine. You can end up with games where you just don't get to do very much, that everyone manages to dodge your torps. And even though, yes, they are still the stealthiest torps in the game, it doesn't really help that much, especially at the higher tiers when there's more powerful Hydra around, and quite frequently you are torping past destroyers which you can't hurt with your torpedoes, but they can sure spot your torpedoes for other ships to then subsequently dodge. So so like I said, this feels like a bit of a not really a true buff. It's a very, very situational thing.
I mean, true, but it's not like Yashima Class is very reliant on its torps, but it's not making it like a bad ship. They just want those ships also to rely on their torps, but have a different target area. Basically, the idea of Deep Waters is to make it easier to land hits. Make it easier to land hits, but you can't torp like destroyers, so that's the downside.
If they would have changed it so that it's hard for other destroyers to even spot the torpedoes, I think that would have been something. Or they.
But it's already pretty hard, right? They have to get very close.
Yeah, they do have to be close, but there have certainly been, especially with the high tiers, when there's that abundance of Hydra around.
But I have been suckered in by the destroyer spotting, because I've had it like a destroyer spotted the torps, right? But it only spotted like half of them, or it missed one or two because the location, like they are so sneaky. But even if they torp a full salvo under the destroyer, you only see like half of them, and you're like, haha, I'm dodging those, and then like a few hundred meters in front of you, the other torp spawn, and you're like, oh crap. So.
To be honest, if I was going to take a deep water destroyer, I'd probably still rather reach for the Asashio rather than any of the Pan-Asians. But yeah, I think the line still peaks at tier 7, to be honest. Mainly because the tier 7 gets those excellent British turret angles.
Yeah, I guess also, they are still scary at tier 7.
Yeah, you have less of the powerful long-range Hydra and radar to worry about.
We will see. Like, they have buffed them 3 or 4 times last year, and now again, so maybe they'll just keep going.
Yeah.
Generally, I have to say I'm happy that they are back to those changes, right? Because like last year, there were a few patches where they seem to start taking interest into rebalancing older ships. Sometimes a bit of questionable changes, but sometimes good changes, right? And then they stopped, right? They basically took a few months break where they suddenly didn't change anything anymore. Now they're back to it. So if they are back to actually trying to rebalance old ships, that's definitely welcome.
Yeah, and hopefully, like I said with the Petra and the Ragnar, hopefully this won't be the last change for those ships that we see in a while.
Then they've also buffed Sock. I don't see many Socks. I haven't played it myself, so maybe it's... they buffed the torps, but they nerfed the guns. I don't know. I haven't run into many Sockies.
An interesting balance shift. 10 is certainly a lot more usable than 8 at high tiers. 8 is getting kind of dangerously close in a lot of circumstances.
Definitely.
There's also a buff there to Gorojevoy's longest range torps as well, 10 to 12 kilometers.
That will make Gorojevoy a lot more interesting, I would say. Like 12 is that significant because now you can base sort of torp Russian raiders without exposing yourself too much. So I felt like 12 is really like a sweet spot from... more is always better, but if you have 12 at tier 10, that's pretty good. So I'm looking forward to testing crossover with that.
Yeah. And also, I just occurred to me to say about Zorky, I'm sure a lot of people blew their credits on the battleships, and I've certainly seen a fair few Yamagiris, so you'll probably see, it'll probably take a while before people then get the credits back to get the kind of less interesting ones like Zorky, so...
I mean, the Russian gunboat line has fallen out of favor a long time ago.
Yeah,
so.
I think so, especially since the French came along. Also, talking of ships with an initially completely flawed concept, Belfast 43, which I think when it very first came out, it only had like 2 of the short duration smokes or something like that. So, yeah, it was basically really, like, there was no reason to play it over the tier 7, essentially.
I mean, it was a weaker Belfast 1 tier higher.
Yeah, and you still don't see it very often at all, even though it's been on sale for a while now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the half-second change will make a lot of difference, but it's a buff and it deserves a buff, so that's good.
Yeah. There's also, under that, we have another cruiser buff. In fact, we have 2 cruiser buffs, but yeah, the Hipper. And this one was, like, I would not have said offhand that the Hipper was particularly underperforming, but clearly it has been underperforming a bit if they've decided to knock off that half-second reload. So that will, over the course of a game, have I would think, a reasonable extra bump to DPM.
Probably.
And I think that's going to be welcome for a lot of Hipper players. I wonder if that's more sort of a product of harsher tier 8 matchmaking these days and being faced with higher tiers more often. Maybe that's been depressing its ability to do damage if it's just surviving less.
I mean, it also always, I feel, fell a bit short with the Prince having the heal. Although the Hipper always had a bit better reload, the heal is just much more powerful.
They tried to differentiate them that way by giving the Hipper that boost to its reload. So yeah, I think Prince is still... If I was going to pick one of them, I will probably stick the Prince, take the Prince Eugen, just with its ability to last longer with that heal. But yeah, I might have to take Hipper out and see how it feels with the 10.5. And in that vein, Talon is getting a half-second reload buff as well, which I haven't played that much, so I can't really say that much about the Talon. I don't know. I don't know if you've got anything to chip in. It's is it 180mm guns on the Talon? That's the one that has the Hipper hull, right? I'm pretty sure it does.
Maybe.
I'm looking it up. No, that's the wrong Talon. That's a Kara class cruiser. Well, I'd have to launch the client, so I'll do that in the background and we can maybe circle back to that.
Okay. So yeah, the carrier like Chekhov getting nerfed, I always like to see carriers getting nerfed, but there are a lot of carriers missing on that list that should get a slap, to be honest.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're nerfing torpedo damage and skip bomber damage and fire chance.
Yeah, so that must have been doing really quite well for its tier if they've decided to nerf torps, skip bombs, and fire chance. Like, that must have been really overperforming, because that's not just like one small change. That's some kind of that's like 3 fairly moderate changes, I would say. So yeah, I'd be interested to see what the stats were for that, like their internal tracking stats versus other Tier 8 carriers if they've decided to hit it that heavily. So yeah, some fairly interesting changes here overall, though. I mean, it is nice that we're getting back to hopefully these more frequent, kind of smaller across the board changes, because it's the nature of any kind of free-to-play game where they are constantly adding stuff that, like, if they're not also at the same time looking at balance and making smaller balance changes on an ongoing basis, that's going to sort of lead to cumulative problems later on.
Definitely. And there are no really bad changes in this, I think. I mean, there are something like if the United States and the Eagle would need more of a nerf. I think the harping thing is pointless. But there's nothing like really offensive when I look at this. So overall, pretty positive, yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Which brings us to submarines.
Yes. Also, yes, Talon is the one that's on the hip with the 180
okay.
millimeters. Yeah.
So submarine changes, there are surprisingly few changes. There is also something that there is an interesting article here for if they want to take a look themselves. It's on Reddit. I can also throw that in chat here. So basically, some smart people did some testing and some maths on some data mining on depth charges and how splash damage and so on works against submarines. And I guess we can go over Reddit first and then do what they are changing, or...
Yeah, it does have some conclusions that I think partly people had already figured out, like the stuff about damage saturation and
yes,
the kind of like the increased the way they've increased the durability of submarines overall.
Yes, so basically submerged subs have practically the same durability as French destroyers, so we've already known that, right? If they just go down, they are hard to damage, let's say. Then there is also HE or SAP is a lot better because there's, I think it was about the splash radius. It's like AP has very little splash, and submarines are very hard to hit directly, so oftentimes your shells might just only hit close. So it's a lot more unreliable to shoot submarines with armor piercing. So it's even more important to switch to something like high explosive to ensure that your shells actually hit damage.
Mm-hmm.
Then about the depth charges, that something that's very interesting, put it like this, is about the air depth charges, right? Now those are about the air, not about the one that you drop at the back of your ship. But the air depth charges have a splash damage coefficient, and if you're very close to the target, you do full damage. But as soon as you go a little bit away, it immediately drops to 35%. So the way this seems to work is it's not that, you basically dropped halfway to the sub or so and now you're getting 50% damage or something. No, it's immediately jumps from 100% to 35%. And then further to 25. And in the outer reaches of the depth charge, it registers as a hit, but it doesn't do damage, right? So in the outer edges of a depth charge hit, from an airstrike, you might see that you hit the target, right? You get the ribbon, but you don't actually do damage. And those are, like, I think the two concerning things is at first that you think you hit it, but you don't actually do anything. And the second part is that they immense damage drop, right? It's not like a linear drop or anything. It's like this huge scale. So once you get out of 30% of the drop range or so, it's like it immediately drops the damage down to the bottom.
Yeah, and it's a big nerf to the by far the most effective weapon against subs, which is airdropped depth charges, because there is a kind of bigger radius overall, and I think less drop off with the ship mounted ones, although they take longer to detonate, as it notes. But like usually getting to the point where you can drop ship-mounted depth charges on a submarine is way harder, and it's a lot easier for a sub to stay out of the kind of the danger area, unless there's like, you know, if the situation's really gone against your team and you're kind of left stranded, then, you know, you're kind of a bit screwed at that point anyway, but you would be in most classes of ships in that scenario. But yeah, by far the most effective way of dealing with subs usually is using the much bigger radius of airdropped ones, but they just have this such a disproportionately huge damage fall off that I think is one of the reasons why subs are now so much more survivable, as it turns out.
Yeah, also ship-mounted depth charges also have a big drop-off, but they only have one. Like they don't have an area where they do 0 damage, and they don't have an area where they do 25% damage. They just do either 100 or like 33% damage. But it's also pretty quickly where they enter the 33%, right? So if you aren't like exactly on top of it, with, as you mentioned, the smaller radius even, it means that for ship-mounted depth charges, unless you're dropping it right on top of their head, your damage is also severely reduced. So, I mean, we all knew how ineffective a lot of countermeasures were, but we weren't aware of just how weirdly wargaming is going about this. It's like, unless you like shove the depth charge into the sub's nose, sub's just gonna laugh at you.
And it goes back to, I think, a problem they've had since day one of they've put this class into a game that was never really designed for that class from the start. So it's essentially, I think I talked about this in a previous one. Like it feels like a good example of what's called parasitic game design, and so we've ended up with this situation where they're kind of swinging fairly wildly between survivability of subs versus kind of like how easy it is for enemy players to deal with them, and you know, the at the same time the kind of their ability to do damage versus players' ability to mitigate that damage. So it's definitely. I don't know if it's possible to really reach a good balance, to be honest, just because they're so generally ill-suited to random gameplay. But we've definitely hit a stage where they are much too hard to deal with for other players. I mean, it's great if you're playing a submarine yourself, but it kind of sucks if you're playing against one, especially a sub player that has figured out how to use it effectively.
So, sounds a lot like carriers, doesn't it?
So yeah, it's a wild swing of the pendulum too far in favor of subs, and I don't know. At some point, we might swing wildly back to subs being a lot weaker, which I'd be fine with, but would, you know, not be so much fun if you're actually playing the subs. But overall, yeah, it's not like they've ever truly managed to find a decent balance for subs of being both fun and effective to play, but also fun and effective to play against, and not just something that you roll your eyes or sigh when you see that there happens to be subs in your match. And
yes,
I think even to a greater extent than carriers.
Very true. Which I suppose can bring us to the new wargaming dev block. So what's wargaming actually changing? Because it's very little. Which is, in my eyes, concerning, because submarines are so wrong currently. And usually when wargaming stops making big changes, it means that they are looking at a product and are more confident that it's going the way they want it to. So that there are so little changes that barely do anything in this iteration has me concerned. It doesn't necessarily mean anything, but let's just say I'm concerned. Now, the first thing they're going to change is the matchmaker, and that's, in a sense, a welcome change, because we've all realized the problem. I'm not sure about you. I've been in battles with 4 destroyers, 2 submarines, and a carrier. which leaves not too many ships that you actually can see.
Yeah, that's generally not fun.
So they want to address this by basically, depending on matchmaker time, but in best case scenario, there will be no more than 4 destroyers and submarines combined, and maximum 2 of them submarines. So it could have like 2 destroyers and 2 submarines. Now that somewhat solves the issue, but at the same time, it creates a new issue in my book, because the thing is that destroyers aren't all the same in that sense, how they what they do in battle, right? If you have like an Elbing or a Kleber or a Shimakaze, that's going to be very differently. So if you have 2 submarines and only 2 destroyers, the 2 destroyers being not cap contesters will have a much huger impact. So it's not really an ideal solution, but it should probably make the situation better than it is. And I feel like while submarines are very sneaky, the problem with submarines going for objectives is, in my experience, they are just not really that mobile enough. And while they have the best disengagement tool by just diving, it takes a while for a submarine to reposition, right? If a submarine is forced to disengage, it needs to completely dive, possibly turn around the entire way, then go out, then turn back, resurface, and try to find a target. And if it's hunting an enemy destroyer there, that can possibly just run away. So for a submarine, positioning is very important. And while a submarine can totally just farm a destroyer, if it charges the destroyer might be able, if it sees the sub coming, to just disengage and so on. So it's a bit weird, because submarines are incredibly powerful, very hard to counter, but they take time to properly position, and the best way to fight a submarine is to run away from it, which you can usually effectively, right? So sailing your submarine in a cap is probably going to cost you a lot of time and isn't going to let you make the most of its armament. So if you try to play a submarine that way, it's probably not ideal. It leaves the 2 destroyers that might not be cap contesters. So I feel like while it solves one problem, the matchmaker is just going to open up another problem.
Yeah, and typically, sub players seem less inclined to go and contest caps anyway. I have seen it happen, but it seems to be less in the sub player mindset than it is the destroyer player mindset. And obviously, like
True.
you said, it does depend on the kind of destroyer. But alongside that, I wanted to say that the fact that they're taking the step of tinkering with the matchmaker to try and address that's usually something they try and leave alone if at all possible. So I think that's kind of significant in of itself, that they're taking the steps to cap the combined total of destroyers and submarines. That they haven't really found any other way to address that issue, and the fact that it is an issue.
It's notable that Wargaming accepts that it is an issue, right? Because, definitely it's an issue if more than half of the team is not really visible on the map and not, actively
it becomes
fighting.
A different game, really, and it's not necessarily a fun game. Like if you're in cruisers and battleships, you just end up with all these. It heavily then depends on the sub and destroyer players, and you can end up with one team just getting absolutely herded by these invisible ships that they can't really see. And if they don't have decent enough players in their own subs and destroyers, then at that point there's no effective counter. So it's the kind of thing where you could have said beforehand, this is going to be an issue, but it's taken it being an issue on the live server before Wargaming has decided that actually we do need to take the somewhat drastic step of actually adding heavier matchmaking limitations in.
Yeah, it's the thing that people have told them for half a year now, at least, and now they're finally listening. Although their solution isn't perfect, it should make it at least a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't solve any of the underlying problems. But it's a it's like there's a giant wound and they have at least put a small band-aid on a tiny scratch of it.
Well, there's a bit of visual imagery for everybody.
Then what else do we have? In order to unclutter the interface, the animation associated with a sonar ping hitting a target has been toned down for ships which currently have active ping sector. I mean, that's good, right? Because it gets annoying if you're already pinged and you constantly hit a ping thingy.
Mm-hmm.
There's a warning sign aiming in a sonar ping direction that intercepts an island. I mean, those warning signs on torpedoes are wrong 85% of the time, so I presume it's the same going to be for sonar pings, so it's not really gonna do much. Added a marker on a depth meter displaying the depth at which the seafloor on the submarine is located. Probably a good change.
Yeah, you're not going to be accidentally ramming the seafloor and then wondering
which
why
you
your
can,
ship
by
is
the way, get
moving.
stuck on.
Yeah.
You can get stuck if you touch the seafloor. Be very...
Yeah.
Might be sticky. Then what else do we have? After some analysis of the combat effectiveness, we have reduced the survivability of submarines. Well, so they increased the radius of ship drop depth charges significantly from 450 to 800 meters. That's a huge increase. That's amazing. But the problem is still, first of all, you need to position yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's the damage drop-off. So we don't know if they're using a different damage drop-off formula then. Right now it's a very harsh drop-off. But so, you might only do very little splash damage to them. But, getting on top of the submarine for a lot of ships is suicide because you gotta charge the submarine. And if you charge a submarine, if the submarine's competent and looking at you and reloaded, it wins. And if it's not ready to take you on, it sees you coming and it just dives and is away before you're there because you can't track it when it dives. So it's, It's a welcome change, but it won't make the biggest difference because those depth charges are very hard to use in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, it's still like 800 meters is a big step up from 450, but you're still having to get pretty damn close with the destroyer. You're still having to get within a kilometer kind of thing, or a cruiser that has rolling charges.
And the next point I find amusing, increase the damage dealt by airstrike depth charges in the outermost part of the damage radius. You remember the outermost part of the damage radius where the damage is 0 right now? So they increase the damage, which means it's not going to be 0 any longer.
Yeah,
they haven't said by
from
much.
0% to, and the fact they just say increase, so it could be literally from 0% to 1%, and it would technically be true.
True. I mean, the thing is, right, it's already down to 25% in the second outermost radius. So unless they want to just merge those two areas, it's going to be probably less than 25%. And considering how this has been going, I presume it's somewhere going to be around 10-15% damage that you're going to do in this race. I mean, still, it's damage. But it's not gonna make the hugest impact, but at least you're gonna do some damage. Meanwhile, they've also reduced the minimum airstrike depth charge distance for battleships. What I still don't understand is why battleships have so much better depth charge planes than cruisers. Like, cruisers are so limited in their range with the range planes. And I guess one of the downside has been that they can't drop very close to their ship. Now they're getting that advantage of cruise. I feel like Wargaming is really just thinking like battleships should be the submarine counters for some reason.
Which is really odd, but no more odd than anything else they've had to do to try and make subs to fit this game. So, what's one more oddity at this point, I suppose, to the utterly ahistorical parody that submarines are in World of Warships.
So while these are technically all changes that help against submarines, none of them seem to be that significant. Like, I mean, the radius increase is significant for the ship drop charges. That's very true, but it doesn't make it easier to use them. And also has been pointed out that you can't see where you drop your charges is awkward, especially if you have like front mount. That's, in my opinion, still a big issue, right? If you're Holland or something that shoots the depth charges in the front, you have absolutely no clue where they're going to land. It's so hard to aim them if you can't see like a marker anywhere. While with the others, you just sail over the submarine, I guess, and you drop it when you think you're on top of it, and you hope for the best. Those charges, right? It's like, I feel like they are very hard to aim. And it would be so simple, I think, to just see on the map where they're going to shoot before you fire them. But hey, maybe that's just me.
Yeah, certainly a lot of guesswork at the moment, and just kind of like doing the wrong thing enough that you then figure out what the right thing is. I mean, I know the first like time or two I tried to use Halland depth charges, it was it was way off. It was way over where I thought it was going to be, kind of thing. So I was just sailing around, firing off my depth charges in essentially random directions that didn't have anything to do where the sub actually was or where I was trying to. So yeah, I think some kind of additional UI element, like, you know, you get the submarine drop indicators, the torpedo drop indicators, something like that for depth charges.
I mean, you could, like with the planes, you get the sub area highlighted. But
yeah,
even
they already kind of do with planes. You can see at least the area where you're going to drop, but with the destroyers, you get nothing.
Then the next changes are they are changes to the sonar pings. So what I really find funny, once again, is so basically instead of seeing the ping coming towards you over the water, they just highlight the area roughly where the submarine is in the water with a very small, hard to see effect. And they say this new effect makes it easier to find the source of the ping, which is a lie. That's a straight up lie. Maybe that was their goal, maybe it wasn't, but they utterly failed. So the new effect makes it harder to find the source of the ping. That's the factual truth. They say it makes it easier because that might have been their intention, but as I said, they failed. Now they have apparently changed the effect to make it even more visible. I don't know how the new effect looks like. So yeah, the feedback they got is the effect disappears too quickly and is difficult to notice. So yeah, basically they literally made it harder to see, and they got the feedback it's harder to see. So that's the story. And they are now going to introduce additional changes, so the effect remains visible for longer. And but basically, they didn't actually highlight the exact place where the submarine is, but some offset, and they now make the effect closer to the submarine. Now, my main problem with the concept is that, first of all, seeing a ping race across the water is very easy to see for everyone, right? Having a certain surface spawn somewhere you still need to look around. And unless you have airdrop depth charges, it's not even that useful, right? With the ping, you can see instantly the direction the ping is coming from, and it's very good information to try to dodge the incoming probes or turn away or whatever, right? While this effect is going to be harder to spot, and it's only helpful if you have like airdrop depth charges, which most people don't. And I have a high feeling that it's going to be a lot harder for the team to make use of this, right?
Yeah, it might arguably maybe be better for an individual player who's really paying attention, but yeah. So overall, it doesn't feel like it's particularly helpful.
Like, how often have you seen pings race across the map? They haven't even hit you, or maybe they're coming for somebody else, right? Yeah. Like, I'm in a destroyer sailing and I see pings coming, right? You see a ship, you see a ping coming, right? You immediately know there's a sub around, even if the sub is not targeting you. Maybe the sub is targeting the battleship next to you, but you see the ping. You know the sub's there, and if you can help, maybe you drop depth charges there somewhere. if you can't see that ping anymore, the person that's not getting pinged, like all the people around you, will no longer immediately know that there is a submarine. So basically what they're making changes that might, in circumstances, benefit those ships that get pinged and have airdrop depth charges, but make it a lot harder for everybody else to be effective against that submarine. So this is going to be mostly a buff for submarines that they're once again trying to sell us into improving anti-submarine warfare.
If there was something coupled alongside that, like you could expend depth charges as a disruption mechanism to, like, because at the moment the only way to break a lock is to like use your damage control party. But if you had the option of dropping your own depth charges, which would, you know, create a bunch of noise in the water potentially, and if that could degrade or completely break somebody's lock onto your ship, you know, that would be at least something that you could actively do as a player. But yeah, at the moment, I don't see how this change enhances the player experience at all. I mean, as you say, it arguably makes it worse. For, well, anyone not playing submarines anyway. I mean, who cares about all the other non-submarine players, right?
Yeah, definitely. A good change though is, I think the way I understand it is they're going to stop the bobbing.
Yeah, I mean, they've said that before and said they fixed
failed,
it, and then it was demonstrated they hadn't fixed it, so maybe they really have fixed it this time. I guess we'll see. I mean, the way they've done it, they say, is that the characteristics of periscope depth are maintained between the depths of 0 and 15 meters, where the border of periscope depth and maximum depth now lies. So basically, if you are 15 meters or above, you are effectively at periscope depth in terms of people being able to do damage and spot, perhaps. It just says the characteristics, so I assume it means the total characteristics of being at periscope depth.
Yeah, I assume that as soon as you go below 15, you immediately lose like the spotting stuff, right? So basically you can't spot while being unshootable. So as soon as you lose the shootable stuff, you also lose the benefits, right? Mm-hmm. Like, so currently it's like you lose the drawbacks before you lose the benefits. So there is an area where you can have all the benefits and none of the drawbacks, sort of, right? And they want to change that by having them both on the same, I presume.
Yeah, they could be a bit clearer with their wording, though. We are having to make a couple of assumptions in what they actually mean. But it does say that both... Now, this is slightly confusing. Yeah, there are two possible levels while at maximum depth, 30 meters and 60 meters. So does that mean those are now both treated as being at maximum depth?
I mean, it sounds like everything below 15 meters is treated as maximum depth, but you can then have two stable levels of 30 and 60, which I'm not sure what the benefit of that is, or why that would be a thing, or why you would need that. It might be with depth charges. Obviously, it takes them longer to sink, right? So I would presume that you are a bit safer of depth charges at 60.
I guess it still gives some room to maneuver vertically as well as laterally if you're engaged with another submarine, potentially. But, you know, not that happens all that often.
I have to be a bit careful. My cable of the cat cam has come under cat attack. Briefly.
Yeah, sometimes they just decide that, oh, that looks chewable. I've had that happen a couple of times. I've got a slight fray mark on my my mouse cable now because Sam decides occasionally, yeah, I'm going to chew that. That looks fun. Something, hairy chaos gremlins, something.
Exactly. Well, in other submarine changes, they've changed the captain skills. Honestly, I haven't really looked into the current captain skills anyway a lot. So I'm not sure, right?
Yeah, I don't. Is there anything that's super significant here? Duration of the mark sector after single sonar ping from. Oh, okay, with Sonar Man. So that increases the effectiveness of just a single ping.
Yeah, so basically it used to increase the effectiveness of 2 pings, and now it increases the effectiveness of single ping, the way I understand
Okay.
it. So makes it easier to use.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose that's not necessarily bad if you have a skill that is more focused around a single ping, because then
it's easier to use.
Yeah. Don't you get extra damage still from double pings, or was that if they abandoned
No, there is no damage. But it's just I think better homing.
It's just the duration
and it's locked on longer.
I honestly couldn't. There's been so many changes with sub mechanics that it's kind of like keeping it all straight without having a literal spreadsheet timeline in front of you of all the the back and forth changes. Yeah. They've tried really hard and so long and tried so many changes, and it still is in the state that it's in. So anyway, that seems like it's probably the most significant. The others seem a little bit less so. So torpedo training. The reload time when you're detected is 5%. It's gone from 5% to 15%. That always seemed like a not particularly worthwhile skill, so I guess that makes it a bit more worthwhile.
Yeah, it's a rather significant buff. I have no idea what the enhanced impulse generator skill looks like now. So
yeah, doesn't that
I can't say what the change does.
Down the something. I can't remember. I made the mistake of closing the client. I should have left it open so I could look at the tooltips. But anyway.
But then the consumable enhancements, it's basically above adrenaline rush, is above. Then improved battery efficiency seems to be above. And the propeller shaft. So basically, they buffed a lot of skills for submarines. So while they made very slight token changes to well, I mean, they had some changes that are some slight nerfs to submarine survivability, but very slight. Then they made sonar ping changes, which is a buff to submarines, and then they buffed all the skills to submarines.
Yeah, it seems overall more buffs than nerfs for subs specifically. Not really a lot of help for people playing against subs in this particular set of proposed updates.
Yeah, so if you were hoping that Wargaming would like hit the submarines with the nerf hammer because they are so obnoxious right now, then you might be very disappointed, because Wargaming has decided that submarines clearly need some help.
Yeah. It's clearly on the spreadsheet there's just not enough people still playing subs, so they have to make them ever more attractive. And regardless of what that does to the balance or the fun of gameplay overall.
True. I know Z-File said you can take subs in training rooms, but I'm not gonna install the test client and then go into a training room and try to test. I mean, I leave the testing of those lot of things to other people, but like a lot of those things need to be tested in combat situations anyway, right? For example, how much will the radius increase here matter in actual gameplay? I mean, I can tell you already right now that most of the time you can't use ship drop depth charges very effectively. That won't change, right? But in the situations you do, you might get a bit more damage out of it. So, and for example, when they say you now deal damage in the outer radius, we don't know by much. Yes, you could take the time to test this on a test server, but I honestly couldn't be bothered to install a test server client, open a training room, and then just to find out that I probably do about 10% damage in the outer radius now of a ship drop depth charge.
So, as ever, we can give them at least partial credit for giving this information ahead of time, although they could have been a bit clearer about some things. But as for the actual changes, I don't think I'm a fan. So, yeah. Subs are with us for the foreseeable future, alas.
Yeah, and
even if they just gave us another vacation for a patch or two, that would be nice, but no.
Let's just say that the changes are mostly in the subs favor and very limited in general speaking, doesn't give me much hope. Because honestly, when I read through this dev blog, for me, it looks like Wargaming is... It looks like they are... Either they are completely out of ideas, or they feel like Submarines are in a relatively good state, because they make very small changes and mostly in favor of Submarines, even though they try to word it in a different way. I still don't understand what you want to test, C-Files. What's there to test? Anyway, I think this is about covering what we had for today, or were there any other interesting news?
The whole split between the economic change stuff was kind of last week, really, but we didn't think that would be enough on its own. So yeah, well, I think between all the topics, we've had a good run of discussion this evening.
Oh yeah.
And we should, in theory, have TC Freer next week. So we might have yet further discussion on numbers things, but we'll see what news there is in the intervening time as well, of course.
Yeah, we'll see if they hit us with new dev blocks the coming week.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we can just call it a night here then, right?
Yeah, I think that's us. That's us done for now.
In the usual shorter 2-hour podcast. So, thanks everyone for being here. Thanks for watching. And we will be back next week. Have a good night, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.